What is up, fellas? How we doing today? The Goob here, coming at you with the history of religion. This should be an interesting episode. Call-ins, as always, are welcome. Before I get into the episode, just some stuff from my personal life, because why not? I might have to put down my favorite chicken. He was attacked by a hawk yesterday, and yeah, I don't think he's gonna make it. He's pretty beat up, so that sucks. Um, but good news is, went on a couple dates this last week. That was fun. First date, right? Admit that I'm balls deep into conspiracy, and that didn't chase her away, so that's a good sign. And then I tell her my favorite comedian is Danny Polishchuk, and she goes, "What's his comedy like?" And I say, "Anti-Semitic Jew." That didn't scare her away. And then on the second date, she tells me that she's Jewish. So I don't know. I thought that was funny. Thought that was kind of funny. I'm very sleepy today for some reason. I don't really know why. And this topic is a very difficult topic to try and cover. And so I'm probably going to be a little rambly, a little scattered. So again, feel free to call in, fellas. Call-ins are welcome. I think this might work better as a conversation anyways. But, we're going to give it a shot. Well, hopefully it's good. Double Zeus and a horse. No, the one on the right was more meant to be like a Christian god. I don't know. It was, yeah, the armor, I guess, gives off more Zeus vibes, but old white man, white hair kind of stuff. I don't believe in yesterday. These theological entities are false idols. If the moon is hollow and we are seated, I really hate the Moonfall movie. Eugenics now, that's spicy. A lot of different ideas in that little comment. But hey, I'm still on the fence for don't look up being for the Apophis meteor analogy, so hey ho. Yeah, so I guess I'll just kind of start with what I believe roughly, which is that when you go back, hello girl, when you go back and you look at the oldest religions and the oldest versions of these religions, you look at the earliest, Jewish texts and the Sumerian texts and the Egyptian texts and the Greek texts and Roman, there's so much parallel, there's so much crossover that it leads me to believe that these are all based on the same thing. And, the flood, supposedly Noah's flood 12,000 years ago, the Younger Dryas event, that's universally recorded. Yeah, Abrahamic. Well, they were Semitic, as well. Yes, they are Abrahamic texts, but yeah, I wish I could talk more about Hinduism. I really just don't know as much about Hinduism as I would like. I'm sure it ties in the same way, though. You look at Zoroastrianism and all of these different religions, and they all are essentially telling the same story. But yeah, you have the flood myth, which has been held for 12,000 years now. Like, that's clearly based on something real. So many events in the Bible. Sodom and Gomorrah supposedly found there's this city out in the desert that had balls of sulfur rained down upon it. Rather interesting. So a lot of this stuff really seems historical. It seems to be based on real events. And I don't see why the tales of gods and angels in those interactions would really be any different. Greece isn't real. Is that something you actually believe? That'd be interesting. Or you're asking that as a question? No, I'm not claiming that Greece isn't real. And so, yeah, the gods were real. The gods were here on Earth. They were interacting with people. And all of those religions I mentioned, except for Hinduism, they were also breeding with people. They were having demigods, and in Hinduism, you have the potential, I guess, to become a demigod. You can kind of rise yourself up to the level of a god. So a little bit different, but still, that uh, crossover between mortal and god, I guess. Um, yeah, I think I've heard that one before. I don't know. I mean, I think that could have been a part of Greece potentially, but as far as like there is Greece, so I don't know. Um, so how is, and I've talked about how the Christian God Yahweh, might be a dragon. Shape shifting is another common element between a lot of these things. The Greek and Roman gods could shapeshift. The Christian angels shapeshift. I don't see why God himself wouldn't be able to shapeshift between dragon and man. Quetzalcoatl was able to shapeshift between dragon and man. Mind Unveiled I really enjoy Mind Unveiled's channel, even when I disagree with his videos, which his most recent one I thought was pretty solid. I don't actually have any like big objections to it. The idea was an interesting idea. Not necessarily one I embrace, but one that I'm open to. And it was just talking about how China, in the Americas likely had links in the ancient past. You see the same kind of flying rainbow serpent gods in China or at least there's a lot of parallels between them and the ones in America. He didn't connect the Aboriginal flying rainbow serpent, but they have it there too. So just more interconnectedness of the ancient world. Like I said, this is going to be a rambly episode. It's a tough topic to cover, so please feel free to call in, direct it a little bit, have a conversation. So there's this shift that occurs from polytheism to monotheism, and this shift in attitudes of gods. The modern Christian God and these modern religions are pretty far removed from what they originally were. You have these original Semitic texts that talk about Yahweh. They talk about El and the Elohim, which was brought up on Danny's show last week with, I forget who brought it up, but he was talking about the Elohim, and he was right. They were polytheistic. It's pretty clear in the earliest Semitic texts that they were polytheistic. They did believe in this pantheon of gods. And Yahweh wasn't even the top god. Yahweh was basically a messenger god who would go in between the real gods and humans and was like the intermediary in between, doing the errands, basically. And then there was this shift to monotheism, and this is very largely due to Plato, it would seem. So real quick, I want to establish a bit of a timeline. You have King Solomon. I think this was 2500 BC, roughly. I could be way off on the dates here, but it was pre-Plato. King Solomon was before Plato. He was a few hundred years before him, and this is the last direct interaction that God has, at least the Christian God has, with anybody on earth. So previously to this, God was basically a micromanager. I mean, he was certainly micromanaging kind of to some extent Adam and Eve, and much further down the line than that. He was popping in and out of people's lives. It was a lot of hands-on approach from God. He had the tabernacle, which I've discussed in an earlier episode, which was this tent that is extremely detailed. This is something that was a physical object. They would construct this tent. There's very, very detailed on what type of materials, what color materials, how to assemble the materials. It was a very, very specific thing that's been recorded. Seems pretty important. All these details have been kept for thousands of years for the tent that God would occupy when he was down on earth. Yahweh is a bad guy, but Daweh, all dates mean nothing. Please, history is created. Start backwards. Where are you? Yeah, well, I'm kind of talking about that right now, Mr. Watson. So 2,500 years ago, or whenever Solomon was around, last time God directly interacted with mankind. few hundred years later, Plato comes around and he's studying all of these religions, and he comes up with this idea of the modern God, this infallible, unquestionable, perfect, all-powerful God. And the gods previously, they were very human-like. They cried when people died, if their family members, even sometimes when mortals would die, they would be sad, they would lament their death, they would laugh, they would, be merry and laugh and have a good time. And these are all, according to Plato, signs of weakness and fallibility. And he constructs what we now have as the idea of the Christian God. And he exports this to many religions. Really, pretty much all of the religions kind of pick this up to some degree. Plato has a massive influence on religion in general moving forward. And it wasn't just him, it was his entire school, so for several generations, this process continued, and had a pretty astounding effect on religion. You have this shift from these real beings that you read about from Egyptian texts to Sumerian texts to Greek and Roman to Semitic texts, all of these different versions of religion. They all had their own gods. It wouldn't be uncommon to go from one city to the next and they worship a different deity. Is this potentially actually each individual deity is a separate entity? Very possibly. It also could just be different names, different interpretations of the same entity. If you had a god interacting with different civilizations, they might have a different name for him. They might, describe them a bit differently. The interaction between the god and that civilization might even be a bit different, who's to try and understand the motives of a god? But yeah, there were these very real gods interacting with people, having children with people, crying when people die, being very directly worshipped and interacted with, and then they disappear for whatever reason. They disappear, and God becomes this abstract idea, and Plato shapes this abstract idea into this all-power, infallible God that we see today. So I think that there's still a lot of value in that, societally speaking and stuff. I think the God that Plato created is pretty cool. I think that the direction that he shaped things weren't necessarily for the worse. But if you want to get to the reality of gods and the truth of religion, you have to go pre-Plato. And I want to talk a little bit about all of the parallels, especially of Jesus-like figures, and how that can be reconciled and understood. I don't think I have seen Moonfall. I've heard of it, but it's not really ringing bells. I don't think I've seen it. Maybe I'll check it out. You're saying it's awful though, or do you are you recommending I watch Moonfall, or are you telling me it's awful, or are you doing both? So I've talked a bit before about Quetzalcoatl and his parallels to Jesus. There is no shortage of figures in history that run parallel to Jesus, though. You have Zoroaster, even before Jesus. You have Sumerian figures and Egyptian figures, which there's the Sumerian Moses, who went through the flood. It's almost the exact same story. Semi-gluten. Okay. I think I am understanding you, but you don't make it easy, Mr. Watson. Again, feel free to call in, fellas. So you have Rosicrucians, you have Quetzalcoatl, you have Zoroaster, you have Jesus, you have so many other miracle workers as well, and other figures that follow the same exact path. And one interpretation of this could be that uh, all of these figures are purely myth. They're just the same story being retold. Maybe there was an original at one point in time, but these are all just figures that are created to tell a story. And I don't lean towards that, actually. I think that's probably not the case. I think there's another explanation. Jesus seems to be a historical figure. Zoroaster was so long ago. I don't know if there's even much of an opinion on him, but I believe these people were real. It's kind of similar to what you see with alchemists, these great alchemists that supposedly achieved immortality in the Philosopher's Stone and stuff. They all follow a very similar path. And is that, again, just because it's this archetypical alchemist story that's being retold, or were at least some of these people real people? And I think they were. And I think it makes sense if, I mentioned earlier in Hinduism, there's a path to godhood. You can ascend, you can transcend. And, if there is this path to godhood, if there's this path to where you're raising the dead, you're performing miracles, you are this godlike figure, it also makes sense that path might be similar, right? That you have to walk this path to achieve these ends. And so the fact that there's so many figures who have walked this path and who have achieved these ends doesn't necessarily suggest to me that it's purely just a story. It kind of makes sense that there are similarities between these people. There could also be something else going on. I mean, if there are gods and mystical forces and destiny, who knows, right? One Piece is a really good show. I really enjoy One Piece, and it's fantastic in its world building and its drawing from myth and story of our world. And I really, really enjoy One Piece and the Morrowind Elder Scrolls universe, because I see so many parallels between those worlds and our world. And honestly, they help me understand our world better by understanding their world better. If that's silly, it is what it is. That's yeah. You do you. Yeah, I do me. Again, feel free to call in, fellas. I'd love to have a conversation about this, because my brain is very scattered. It is difficult to try and be coherent right now and have this flow in a linear fashion. But if I'm having a conversation, then I can be direct back and forth, little bit easier. So all of these different Jesus figures, all of these different, and the gods, you see the same thing. You see all of these parallels with the gods, like with Yahweh. I've seen people try and compare him to multiple different Greek gods, as well as Egyptian gods and Sumerian gods and other various gods. And the amount of parallels that they draw between all of these gods are rather convincing. If you go, yeah, Yahweh was actually Zeus, you can make a very, very compelling argument. And at the end of it, I'd be like, yeah, that all makes sense. That all tracks. It seems like the same guy. Then they'll turn around, someone else will make, Yahweh is Hephaestus. And again, it's a really compelling argument. You see a lot of parallels, and you're like, yeah, that all adds up. Sounds like he's Hephaestus. Or Dionysus, like I've heard for all three of those, and probably other gods as well. And again, this can be, at first glance, really difficult to reconcile. How are all of these gods the same, but they're also all different gods? And I think there's, a couple possible explanations. One is the extraterrestrial route, right? I've discussed these extraterrestrial beings before that interact with people, take whatever shape they need to take, are just trying to accomplish their goals, essentially. And that would very potentially explain all of that. You have these gods that are both reoccurring and changing and shifting and morphing, while these extraterrestrials are this amorphous idea, basically, so no real issues with that one. the more I look into history and the more I try and make sense of everything, the more I have to acknowledge that Ancient Aliens really fits pretty well, and can't easily be dismissed. I initially was pretty anti-Ancient Alien. Um, I think probably because of the TV shows and stuff. I think that show is actually deliberate psyop, where even if it's not Ancient Aliens, I think they are dropping little bits of truth in there and stuff, and then covering it up with ridiculous ideas so that it can all be dismissed wholesale. And so I think they got me with that psyop a little bit initially, because I was pretty anti-Ancient Aliens, but the more I look into it, it's highly compelling. Ancient astronaut theorists say yes. So you're still going on about Moonfall. Is anyone else in the chat? Is it just me, you and me, Mr. Watson? You might as well call in if it's just the two of us. Might as well have a conversation. Yeah, the Ancient Aliens thing. And for me, the distinction between a god and an alien really isn't... I don't necessarily see the distinction. You know, what makes the difference? I'm not too sure. And yeah, if you have these different beings interacting with different parts of the world, it makes sense that you see differences. Also, if they are this alien race, they're all from the same race, it would also quite likely make sense that there's at least some similarities between them. And one of the big similarities, like Hephaestus I mentioned, and early Yahweh, metallurgy, the gift of language, the gift of knowledge, the gift of technology. This is a parallel that you see across many different gods from many different cultures. And so people draw these parallels. Oh, Yahweh, Hephaestus, these other gods, they're all the same. Look, they all deal with metallurgy, and they all deal with technology and gifting language and knowledge. But if you were this alien race interacting with these primitives, that kind of makes sense that multiple different aliens might be doing that. So again, I think it's the idea of these real gods in the past and these parallels, yet also these differences, works with Ancient Aliens. Same exact application you can apply to ancient humans. Not all of these religions, but many of these religions out there, the Mayans, I believe the Chinese religions, they speak of previous ages, golden ages, silver ages, ages of monkey men. Hinduism also does this, and that's an idea I'm extremely open to. I think we have gone through many ages. I think it's pure speculation what heights we may or may not have achieved during these different ages. There's zero physical evidence and even very, very little story evidence. But if you go by Hinduism, if you go by Mayans, there's a lot of parallels, a lot of crossovers. There was a golden age before this that had heights achieved that we can only imagine, these incredibly long lifespans, this mystical level of technology, it would seem, this prosperity that we can only imagine. And you go back into the king's lists of Sumeria and Egypt and these other places, the Bible, where these lifespans get longer and longer the further you go back. So the idea of Atlanteans, if you want to call them that, or whatever, these advanced humans coming back to Earth after a cataclysm, after the Great Flood, re-gifting the people that were left over, technology and language and all of these things. Same basic idea as the Ancient Aliens. It's just ancient humans that live for tens of thousands of years. Why the gods disappeared, if they're aliens, maybe they just left. Who knows? If they're these ancient humans, maybe they just died. Maybe they left. I think that this is at least addressed in Christianity, the disappearance of God. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily directly addressed so much, but the implication is there that God has disappeared because they talk about his return. right? So he has to leave to return, and at the end of times he'll return. And I think with the spicy sun that I've talked about many times, I think we are nearing that end of this current age. We could be seeing the gods returning quite soon. If this is a cycle that happens, and it does seem that there is a cyclical cataclysm, and there is talk about these previous ages, it would seem that every so often the Earth gets, butt blasted, and humanity is reset. Gods come down, they help restart it, they interact, they give us a boost, and then I guess they disappear for a while, and they show up with the next cycle, and they help restart the next cycle. So if you want to think of them as aliens, as however you want to picture gods, as these Atlanteans or even these extraterrestrials, any of those ideas I think could fit. But yeah, I think we could be seeing them again quite soon, like within our lifetimes, honestly. So I don't know. That could be interesting. Let me read what you've been saying, Mr. Watson. Okay, so don't watch Moonfall. Cool. Same as Marvel. Gotcha. Okay, it's a recent movie. The Moonfall. Okay. No, Snowfall is what I was just thinking of. Yes, it is alien, ultra terrestrials, fairy folk. Yeah, I mean the extraterrestrials cover the fairy folk. I personally kind of think there's a separation. I do believe in the extraterrestrials, or at least I lean towards it. I'm very favorable on it. It explains a lot. The idea of the extraterrestrials explaining the UFOs as well is something I'm pretty open to. These beings that essentially archons, whatever, for simplicity's sake, just coming down and kind of messing with people, and also quite possibly tied to the occult, giving knowledge for sacrifices and stuff like that. I think that could be quite real. But I think there's probably a distinction, even though I was just saying the extraterrestrials work as these gods. I think there is probably a distinction. These gods seem more physical. They seem more real. I mean, they were directly interacting with people. They were having children with people, right? And then you have these sons of God. You have Dionysus and Jesus and Quetzalcoatl and all of these various figures performing miracles and seemingly being historical figures of man. So I think there's probably a separation. I think it probably is something different. You have all the demigods. You have the Nephilim, from the Bible, with the half angel, half human. So that I think there is a separation between the extraterrestrial and these gods. They could potentially be related, though. Like the spirits of the Nephilim could be these extraterrestrial. If you have this immortal angel, right, and then you have a human and they have children, what happens to that soul, that spirit, whatever, of this half immortal, half human creature? Really getting into kind of abstract, theoretical ideas. But yeah, I think there's probably, I lean towards a distinction between the extraterrestrials and these gods. I think these gods were something more solid, but I lean heavily towards the gods being real. And I'm becoming more and more open to the idea of these extraterrestrials and there being some other type of interdimensional, whatever, something we can't explain still, interacting with us. 30,000 years since Neanderthals. Were they that recent? I know modern humans go back way further than that. 10,000 since last ice age. Yeah. On time crystals will be forever and always be. The crystal skulls. A lot of people suggest the crystal skulls are just that. They're an interesting story. Some of them do seem to be legit. Whether there's anything mystical about them, I haven't seen that demonstrated really, but they're a fun story. The crystal skulls are fun. Maybe I'll talk about that one week. Cereal. We are gods. It's a fallacy. Yeah, the Gnostic approach is also something I'm somewhat open to, at least. I don't think we are gods, but the Elder Scrolls that I discussed earlier, right? There is this you can achieve Chim, or Kim, or whatever, however you pronounce it, where we're in a world that is the dream of the Godhead. Everything is a product of this Godhead's dream, which also allows for these multiple realities to exist. This shifting past and present. If one thing in the present conflicts with something in the past, you can just overwrite it and change it. It's a dream, right? Something that I'm actually open to as an idea. But you can then realize the truth of reality and get to a point where you can assert influence over the dream. You realize you're in a dream, and now basically you're lucid dreaming within someone else's dream. So yeah, this idea of transcending what we are and becoming gods, it certainly seems to be suggested by Jesus and Quetzalcoatl and Rosicrucians and Zoroaster and all of these other figures, and to some degree these alchemists that I mentioned earlier, which is a pretty interesting topic. So yeah, are we gods? I think not necessarily, but maybe we could be, right? Togogan is Yahweh, 10th planet, go. I see you after the fall. It's on site. I'm a pimp my mobility scooter to killer scooter. I saw that in the low value mail chat. They're like a quad bike without the need for license. Don't need insurance either. Gonna be touring. Giant makers, lad, recycled. Yeah, I also do believe in giants, and I think the giants are a product of these gods, the offspring of gods and humans, angels and humans. Again, what's the distinction really between an angel and a god? One has a bit more power, but they're both not human and both immortal. They're essentially both gods, right? So yeah, I do believe in angels. I do believe in I do believe in giants, the Nephilim. You have so many stories from the Native Americans and many stories in other countries and continents of so often red-headed, pale-skinned, cannibalistic giants. So it's yeah, I definitely think there's something there. I'm going to be touring time crystals. Yeah, but that's one of the arguments, is that the crystal skulls were time crystals, basically, I believe. If we agree on a language to write on them, it will be and forever be. Hologram theory. Yeah, I think so for the crystal skulls. If your auntie had balls, she'd be your uncle, but she doesn't, does she? I'm a peasant of a long line of peasants. All right, so do you have any questions, fellas? In summary, the gods were real. They interacted. There's the tabernacle. Very, very important that they retained all of those details for the tabernacle. If God was just this abstract idea that Plato created, why would you create the tabernacle and then so detailed with so much emphasis on, hey, like if God was coming down to earth and he goes, hey, I need you to build me a place for me to stay, and this is how I want it built. Those details are going to be very important, right? And that's how it's treated in the Bible. I mean, these details have been recorded for thousands of years and kept pristine for thousands of years throughout different cultures and different interpretations and all of this stuff. They've managed to keep that because, again, if God was real, he's coming down. That's some important. You want to keep that, right? So there's just too much for me to suggest that the gods weren't real. I think they were. I think that they're all drawing from the same source. All of these religions, you're even if you're not talking about pre-flood, even if you're ignoring pre-flood, there's 12,000 years between now and the flood, and that was kept. That's not even the earliest part of most of these religions. Most of these religions don't start with the flood, right? They go back before that. So these stories have been being kept alive for tens of thousands of years, or at least 10,000 years, right? And so the idea that you see large differences between these stories, between cultures, isn't surprising at all. The amount of parallels, the amount that has been retained over such a long time is actually very incredible to me. It clearly to me suggests that they all come from a common source, that they were all based on something real, that these gods were real. And yeah, the fact that you see slightly different versions, totally rational to me. I think they are all based on the same thing, though. I didn't even get into Hinduism very much. Like I said, I don't know that much about it, but there's a lot of really interesting stuff. I mean, you've got the Vimanas, you've got a lot of really kind of crazy stories from Hinduism. I didn't go into Mayanism either, which there's a lot of parallels between Mayanism and Hinduism, and some of the suggestions from interpretations, right? That a lot of ancient aliens, a lot of high technology, some really interesting stuff. Maybe I'll go into that in a later episode. I think I'm going to wrap this one up because I don't want to just keep rambling incoherently. I covered a little bit, almost not quite decently. But yeah, I think I'm going to wrap it up. Unless you want to call Mr. Watson or anyone else wants to call. I think that's the episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, if you want to me to talk about, like more specifically any of these topics, let me know. And yeah, that's the episode, folks. Gonna wrap it up a little early. Hope you enjoyed it. Gods were real. We might be seeing them again soon. The sun is getting very spicy, and within our lifetime, we might be seeing them return. I think that's a very real possibility. So, am I Christian? I kind of would consider myself Christian, but obviously not the traditional variation, because I believe in multiple gods. But I think that Christianity has pretty well figured out how to live your life. I think that Jesus was real. And so if there, like I said, if there is this path to enlightenment, if there's this path to Kim and transcendence, it would seem that Jesus's path is the path to follow, right? So I believe in Christ. Do I believe in the Christian God exactly as it's laid out in the Bible? I don't, because I believe in gods plural, but I think they do have a lot of it. The path to enlightenment, I think what Jesus has laid out in the Bible is probably about as close as you're going to get. So yeah, thank you for tuning in, fellas, and I will catch you next week.